Hi, everybody. Can you all hear me properly? Cool. Awesome. So welcome to our very first webinar session of customer engagement done right. I see some of you already connected. So thank you very much for joining us today. Just to info, so we'll wait a few minutes for everybody to join. I see, perfect. So the presentation will actually start at 2:05, just to give a little bit more time for everybody to be able to join us. I'll quickly introduce myself. So I'm Anne-Laure, mobile strategist at Limplum here in Amsterdam, and super excited to be hosting this session today around mobile gaming hacks. So the 3 tricks to improve player retention and revenue. I'm also super thrilled to introduce today's speaker, Nathan Kelmans. So maybe Nathan, you can tell us like a few words about you before we start?
Yeah, for sure. Hey guys, welcome to the session. Thank you all for joining. We'll be kicking off with the actual presentation very shortly, but a little bit about myself. I'm an account executive at Limplum, and I've been working very closely with mobile gaming and mobile apps in general in the past few years. On especially exploring what their challenges are in growing as a mobile app or as a mobile game, and exploring where their use cases could be improved. So what we'll present to you today is very much a learning from our customers and from some of these use cases that we've seen. I'm also basically switching between hosting webinars and playing Doom Eternal and Bannerlord. So I'll be back to that this afternoon after my working hours. But I'm really thrilled to be hosting this session for you guys.
Thank you, Nathan. And actually, you're right. The whole idea behind this webinar series is actually to, well, use our home office time in a different way, just so we can share like more knowledge throughout the mobile industry. So as Nathan talked a bit about in this session, we will walk you through how to approach mobile games user lifecycle, and how to boost it for long-term retention and revenue growth. So just before I give the mic back to Nathan for the presentation, just want to point out a few logistic points. First one, this is a live webinar and it's being recorded at the moment and will be available on demand through the Limplum's website. Also, as we would love you to be involved into the webinar, just feel free to send us your questions through the Zoom Q&A button, just at the bottom of your screen. And we'll be answering your questions at the end of this presentation. And we'll also be following up by email and sending you the link to the recording so you can share it around or rewatch it as you will. We also look forward to your feedback around this session. So as you can also see on the bottom of your screen, you can click through a polling button to give us your insights of this session. So now I'm really thrilled to introduce our resident gamer, Nathan. If you actually want to start the presentation now, that will be perfect. And we will be just showing our email addresses, our contacts at the end of the session as well, so we can follow up and you can send us more questions later on. Nathan, all yours.
Cool. Yeah, we can get started. I see we have a couple more minutes before 2:05, so let's just hold it for there for a second, and then wait for a few more people to come in, and then at 2:05 we can kick off the presentation itself. If you have any questions already, please feel free to drop them into the Q&A. I think that's best way forward.
Yeah, we will keep them all for just after the presentation, so we can really like take the time to dive a little bit into them, and yeah, follow up at the end. Yeah, that's pretty much it from now on. And just before then we start the presentation, we're gonna have like a second webinar within 2 weeks. So on Tuesday, the 14th of April, that will be like the second session. And we will be announcing it as well at the end, just so you can, we will be following on this. But it will be entitled How to Deliver Best-in-Class User Engagement. So the best practices and strategies. So feel free to join as well for this second session. And I think now we can actually start.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, cool.
In Mobile Gaming Hacks, 3 Tricks to Boost Player Retention and Revenue, we'll be focusing on how to grow a mobile game without necessarily spending effort into user acquisition. First off, let's start with a paradigm that we like to call the leaky bucket. Now, this is very simple. It's a very vague overview, and it's really to put it in the simplest terms possible. If you look at a bucket and you figure out that it has leaks, first you have to see this. You have to actually be able to observe that the bucket has a leak. Secondly, you may want to patch that leaky bucket. You don't want to throw it away because it's your bucket, but you do want to patch and fix it. And finally, once you've patched and fixed it, you want to use that improved bucket. This is as simple as we can put it, but I'll explain why I'm using these very simple terms to describe this. Really, it can be boiled down to 3 main steps. The first would be that if you were looking at your bucket and you were trying to see that there's a leak and you were trying to see where the leak is, or even how bad it is, seeing is understanding. But when we pull that to a mobile game, data isn't always unified and reliable. It comes from a bunch of different sources that may be talking against one another. One source may say that your monthly active users is one number. Another source may say that it's an entirely different number. Depends on which source that you're looking at. So if you look at a bucket and you can't even trust your eyes, then how do you even know where the leak is? Secondly, if we look at that patching the leaky bucket, if you are trying to fix it without assuming, then you might be set up for a pretty poor success if you're addressing it while relying on those assumptions. Again, you're relying on the assumption that you can actually see where the leak is. If you don't know where the leak is, then you're only assuming on how to fix it, and trying to fix it may completely miss the mark. Finally, when you're trying to use your improved bucket, we're trying to relate that to post-install engagement. Your spend on user acquisition is not necessarily sticky. It's expensive. People are leaking out of the bucket, if you will. But you've spent quite a lot on bringing new people in. So how do you keep them there? Well, one way may be to engage. We'll dive into that a little bit more later. If we take a good look at the bucket and put it into terms that some of you may be more familiar with, they're called the pirate metrics, or ARRRR. We go from acquisition to activation to retention to referral to revenue. Obviously the golden goose of marketing. But if we go down this funnel, there are drop-offs. Drop-offs, with that I mean people dropping out of this funnel and leaking out of your bucket. During the acquisition phase, you may just have acquired new users, but they may drop out almost directly because there's a poor onboarding or almost no onboarding before they can even be activated. During the activation phase, people may be dropping out because they never understand what the value is of getting into your app. During the retention phase, you may be losing users because they may find your game repetitive, not engaging. Maybe it's not rewarding at all. Maybe playtime just becomes a rote and repeat process where you're not really seeing the reward for that amount of effort that you're putting into it. Next, the referral step is always kind of wishy-washy, but one way to put it is, would someone recommend your game to someone else? And one great way to do so is if you look at App Store ratings. If people are only rating when they're annoyed, then anyone who this game might be recommended to is going to first take a look at the App Store rating and only see poor or negative ratings. And we all know that we all are more likely to leave a negative review about something when we hate it than to leave a positive review about something when we really like it. It's the same nature of the beast as you find with maybe hotel ratings or travel ratings or food ratings. Everyone's always very quick to say, I hated it, and this is why. But not a lot of people are very likely to post online about why they really liked something. Or even if something was, a decent service. It wasn't excellent, but it was decent. They're not going to leave a rating. And finally, after all of these steps and all of these potential drop-offs, we come to the revenue phase where if you simply have, for example, a poorly designed monetization in place, things might be too expensive or people don't see the reason to spend, or you're doing subscriptions when the more popular model might be buying in-app purchases. All of that can fail and miss the mark entirely in trying to make money for your mobile game. Now, the result of this retention problem is that the majority of players abandon a mobile game by the end of day one. Something like 90% are basically gone or are about to fall out after just a day. Here we see on the left is from the Fixu index. In fact, 21% of day one users are retained after 1 day, but this is for mobile apps in general. And this curve starkly decreases after just a few more days. At 10 days, more than 90% have already dropped out. Now, trying to understand why this is happening isn't easy. We come back to the problem of not being able to trust our eyes when we look at the leaky bucket. Data coming from all different angles doesn't always match up. Now, this is just a selection of some of the tools that are in place and some of the metrics that might be in place for any sort of app or any sort of game. But often these different sources just don't match up. Your acquisition vendor might be saying one thing, whereas your CRM might be saying a completely different thing. Your analytics platform may be pulling information from incomplete sources in turn, and though it may be a great technology, doesn't necessarily have the full picture and an accurate picture. So if we take this one step back, let's work on solutions. Now, 3 ways to go about this that I wanted to focus on would be, first off, being able to unify data and being able to build reliability of data. So identifying a single source of truth and being able to trust it. Secondly, would be testing your product against drop-offs so that you can eliminate those assumptions that you're making. And thirdly, engaging with players instead of hoping that they engage with you in turn. Now, that's a very major part that we'll dive into more in a second, but really, if most games out there are focusing on just being a very engaging product, then really you're just hoping that players will engage with you in turn. Whereas you could be using all of the different channels at your disposal to also reach out to them. So if we take a look at that multitude of different sources of information, let's first focus on having a common thread. Integrate your different technologies, integrate your different data sources, and try to simplify where you can. Do you need to have multiple different analytics platforms or multiple different testing technologies or multiple different acquisition campaigns run by completely different agencies and vendors? Maybe not. Maybe it works for you, but at least you should be able to have one source of truth to understand how healthy your game is and how you are going to act on the leaks that may be taking place. Now, if we focus on 3 tricks, which was the core of this webinar, we can also focus first on the problems that they're meant to solve. The first problem would be, if you look at opting into push, it is typically quite low. Not a lot of people opt into push, and that's partly a problem of how people are asked to opt into push notifications. But the problem boils down to one of communication. If you have no access to being able to message your players, to reach them more easily, then the options down the road to be able to engage with them and pull them back to your game are going to limit themselves. This isn't limited to push notifications. This can be for any channel of messaging. So the first trick that I'd like to talk about is something quite nifty. It's pretty easy to set up, and there's a lot of different technologies out there that support you with it, including Leanplum. And that's push pre-permissions. What you want to focus on is, instead of asking someone for the opt-in to push notifications right up front when they install your game and when they haven't even seen the value of playing your game. They don't understand why it's fun, why it's engaging, and they have completely missed the value that you have built in your mobile game. Why not instead wait until you are pretty sure that they're happy? They've just unlocked a certain level. They've just beaten a boss. It's been an enjoyable moment, and you know this because you've built the product, and you know that players are going to keep coming back to your game for moments like that. Follow that up right in the moment of their happiness with the ask and the convincing value proposition of having push notifications. Maybe this boss level is a timed exclusive, and they may want to be asked, they may want to be notified about this sort of levels again in the future. Now, what's quite surprising here is that actually only 42% of mobile users opt in for push notifications on iOS. This is from our own research. And so just being able to lift this percentage by focusing on those happy moments in your mobile game and asking people for their permission to be notified with the value proposition of explaining why you want to notify them can drastically increase the success of you being able to reach them. Now, the second problem is if we focus on fixing that bucket, we may want to change the product. We're going to want to patch the bucket, but we're going to want to change the bucket in doing so. And so the second problem is trying product changes, which in itself is a risky endeavor. Trying new features, trying change in general is very difficult for players. Players are a very fickle bunch. I'm sure some among the audience here might remember completely changing its entire model of play and drastically losing its entire player base. And there are countless games, not just in mobile games, but across all sizes and devices that have tried a major product change to 100% of its users without thinking about the possible ramifications. I mean, I got these screenshots from Reddit, which is a quite popular website nowadays, and way back in the day saw its largest boost in user base because its largest competitor tried a complete product change to 100% of users without testing it out to smaller groups. And that's what we focus on. So the second trick here is segmented experiments. Trying new onboarding flows, for instance, is a very major way of being able to engage better with your players by first focusing on how to actually get them to stick around in the game. Now, here on the left, you see an example of one of our clients, IMVU. IMVU actually realized that one of their most major drop-offs was during the avatar collection phase, the avatar creation phase. They would go through this part of being able to customize their character, and lots of options would be presented. So first off, they wanted to A/B test how exactly that avatar creation and avatar customization was done. It's a very simple A/B test of the user experience. But what they also realized that while doing so, they could hook the player sooner by presenting specific users and specific user segments with free credits so that people would be more encouraged to come back to the app later and actually redeem those free credits. And in doing so, in presenting an A/B tested onboarding flow to a segment of users that would be incentivized and encouraged to play longer in the game and actually keep coming back to redeem those free credits, they actually lifted their retention 157% and lifted their average revenue per user by doubling it. And in fact, they went one step further, and that's not added here, but they hooked in a re-engagement vendor by targeting them with ads outside of the game after they had already left the game, and then in fact even tripled their retention. Now, the third problem is waiting for players to engage with your game. This is such a major problem in not just mobile gaming, but in mobile apps in general. You've built a fantastic app, you've built a fantastic game, and most users, in fact, get this sort of user flow that you see before you. You try to onboard them, They drop off after seeing some initial value, maybe why they downloaded the app to begin with. So maybe your referral system is working. But ultimately, after those first few sessions, you're just hoping to reactivate them. And ultimately, after a while of the app just sitting in the background of their phone, they uninstall. And then the whole time you've been trying to reach out to them to reactivate them. But you're maybe doing so wrong. Because this is a trick that we've learned from working with a variety of different customers across a variety of different industries. Really, the focus here in the third trick is, if they leave, don't just make them aware of the fact they've left. It might even incentivize them to uninstall. No, instead, incentivize them to come back. And don't be shy here. You can offer discounts. You can offer free credits. You can offer free premium. The only thing you lose by not doing so is the user. So there's no loss in giving them a little so that they can stay in longer. And in fact, this is an example that we saw with ViaVan. ViaVan is one of these ride-sharing companies that is quite adventurous with the discount offers that they make to pull back users in a very competitive space against the likes of Uber. Really, nobody will complain about getting free things, and risking it while trying to get them back may cost you a little by discounting, but in the long run, you'll keep the user a little longer. And in fact, this campaign by Via with special offers on dormant users led to a 27% increase in users returning to the app and actually staying for 7 days or longer. Finally, just to give a little bit of context about LeanPlum. So we're a platform that leverages not just engagement, but also A/B testing and analytics for any mobile app and mobile game. And I'd like to thank you for sitting through my little session. If you have any questions, please feel free to send them to us. Our contact details will follow.
Awesome. So thank you so much for this presentation, Nathan. I hope you all enjoyed it, and I know some of you had like little issues with the sound. I hope not too many people had it. So now we'll start shortly our question and answer session, and we'll be answering all the questions that you have already been sending, and feel free to keep on sending them, and we'll make sure to answer all of them. Once again, before we jump in there, I just want to inform you about the second session. You can see all the details on the bottom right of this slide. So this is planned on Tuesday, April 14th, and there will be around how to deliver best-in-class user engagement, so the best practices and strategy. So I guess we can start. We already have like some questions. The first one is written by Yuval Beirav. Sorry if I say the wrong name, not in the correct way. Regarding A/B testing onboarding, what would be the top KPIs to test against in your mind? So maybe Nathan, you can start answering on this question.
Sure. So this is really dependent on what your business goal is for your mobile game. Some games are, focused on geolocation models like Pokemon Go. Some are focused on, ad-based monetization. Some are focused on, in-app purchases, and others are focused on subscriptions. So really where this is defined is by taking it a step back and looking at your own business KPIs. Try to align those then to the A/B tests that you're running. If you are putting forward a new feature, does it align with your own North Star metric? And from that top line goal, are you making sure that your own milestones are driving towards that? It's very easy to say that 30-day or 7-day retention should be your top goal, but it's also very easy to say that I'm just going to drive 1 million messages to make sure that people just keep coming back to the app. That in itself is an approach that is much more focused on the outcomes, the results. So, just raise retention and more engagement through more messages. But if you look at your own goals, you may want to focus on, time in app spent so that they see more ads or, subscriptions of a certain length sold. or engagement with a new feature. If, for instance, you're pushing like a Grand Prix in a racing game. So just to simplify that, take a look at your own business KPIs and try to align your A/B tests around that. I hope that helps.
Awesome, thank you. Second question by Clark Baldwin. So regarding email, would you suggest using it moving forward to speak with engaged and potentially churning players? And in that mind, offering them regular rewards for allowing us to retain their contact information? And if so, is Leanplum able to support that kind of campaign?
So that's two questions. And the first, should you do it? Absolutely. We actually have some documentation that we can send in follow-up regarding mixing push notifications and more mobile-focused channels of messaging with email. And in fact, what we'll find is through mixing the two, we've drastically raised the amount of re-engaged and engaged players and mobile users in general. But it really comes down to what exactly are you trying to do with the email, and what exactly is the content that you are communicating with it. I have seen countless emails, and I'm sure you have too, of just trying to raise awareness for a mobile app or for a service. I mean, we've just gone through receiving entire waves of companies giving updates to the current crisis, for instance. Does that necessarily communicate something that people will want to receive by email? Maybe not. So focus on, again, what your KPI is. Focus on making the decision where, giving a free discount is worth it for a certain user. So for that, you may need to know the lifetime value of the user. If their lifetime value is just a couple of euros at a certain point and you're giving them a €5 discount, then maybe you reconsider that decision. But in essence, using email to weave together with push messaging is definitely a logical way to do it. And yes, Leanplum can help doing so. We frequently combine email as one of the most effective channels to reach, especially in e-commerce cases, to reach customers. But in gaming, for sure, it can be used to great effect.
All right, I see two different questions. Just going back to the chat. So from Sergey, you're welcome. And I see, so what can you tell about retention and revenue in hyper-casual games?
I actually see that the question keeps going for a little bit.
Yeah, it's interesting whether you have ever faced with this genre, and maybe you can share some insights. So.
Yeah, for sure. Hyper-casual games are definitely a tough spot to start looking at long-term retention. And that's because you're essentially facing a business model where you only have a certain very limited amount of time to engage with a user. And this is actually where we'll start focusing very much more on that ability to go and A/B test experiences, because you have such a short window of time to really captivate a player, try to get them really engaged and maybe monetized within those sessions, and make sure that that user experience is done as well as possible. So through product A/B testing, you could, for instance, take the information that you already know from an acquisition campaign, like maybe they came from Facebook for a certain themed advertising. Through your attribution partner, you'll know which campaign they came through, and through a platform like Leanplum, you'll be able to use that information to then drive a UX product A/B test so that it's tweaked specifically to address consistently to every single user. You're personalizing the first few experiences to drive them to that monetization experience. So there, it's not necessarily thinking about day 30 retention. It's not necessarily thinking about long-term subscriptions or selling season passes. It's more about making sure that you perfect that very short window of time that you have to work with them.
Awesome, thank you. And the next question from ES. So what in-game, so on the client side, what in-game triggers can be available for multiplayer games, such as like invite to a battle, message in the clan chat, etc.? Is anything like that possible, or is it just timer a message from the cloud?
So actually in Leanplum, we can use any event that you can capture and that you can set up a start call for Leanplum to essentially trigger something. So if you are in a multiplayer game and your game is tracking what is happening within the game, or the start of the game or the end of the game, or maybe the final standings, you could use all of those different triggers to go and set up messaging after that. You could trigger in-app messages that, congratulate them, maybe send them some kind of free gift on it. You could hard code that within your game, but if you then want to go and take the experience outside of the game itself, and you want to have external messaging support that, then those triggers are going to be paramount for very personalized experiences. I can only speak from my own experience here. There's a couple of games that have fantastic, very engaging, Grand Prix or tournament features that actually message you as soon as, someone's just beaten your time, or someone has just raised your castle. And, those kinds of triggers can definitely be used to drive a user back to the app, and then be very convinced about having to spend more to beat that time, or to beat the player who just raised your castle. There's a lot to do there.
Awesome, thank you. I'm checking the time at the same time, and I think we're running a little bit out of it, unfortunately. So just feel free to send us any of your questions through any of the email addresses that you can see on this screen. We'll be really happy to follow up on it. Thank you so much for attending as well this very first webinar session. We're really happy to be able to do that, especially at the time. So thank you so much for joining us, and for all your insights and your questions as well.
Cool. Thank you, guys.
Wish you a very
after
nice
this
day.
is all over, I would love to see you guys all at the different conferences that I'm sure will be taking place after the summer, hopefully. Pocket Gamer Connects and Gamescom, you'll be seeing me there.
Awesome. Thank you, everybody, and have a nice day. See you soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.